After years of threatening to burn the United States in a sea of fire, North Korea is on the verge of having an intercontinental ballistic missile, an ICBM, capable of hitting the American homeland with a thermonuclear warhead. The missile is called the Hwasong, which translates to Mars, the Roman god of war. As you will hear tonight, North Korea's brash young dictator, Kim Jung Un, is not there yet and will need several more tests before he has a weapon he can count on. Still, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs calls it the greatest threat facing the U.S. today. Defense Secretary James Mattis went to the DMZ 2 days ago and vowed to stand with South Korea against the North. Tracking that threat and helping to come up with defenses against it is the job of the National Air and Space Intelligence Center, NASIC for short, located near Dayton, Ohio. If you've never heard of NASIC, that's because television news cameras have never been inside its operations center. Until now. On any given day at NASIC, more than 100 photo interpreters, engineers, rocket scientists, and intelligence analysts are pouring through reams of data collected every time North Korea launches a missile. Last summer, says NASIC Commander Colonel Sean Larkin, the North Korean threat went to a whole new level.
They demonstrated the ability that they could reach the continental United States.
The lower 48?
Yes.
There were 2 tests, one on July 4th and again on July 28th. Both were launched at a very high angle, so they did not go far out to sea. But once NASIC crunched the numbers, there was no doubt. Had one of those missiles been fired on a standard trajectory, it could have reached California and beyond.
Math is our secret weapon. So there's lots of things that go into an ICBM or other types of weapon systems that simply, even if we don't have the pieces of the puzzle, we can do the math and figure out what's missing.
Well, this is the actual code that we develop.
This is a computer simulation of North Korea's ICBM, produced by Jeremy Sewell and his team of analysts.
So can you take me through what this would look like on a flight?
Yes.
This is the god of war, North Korea's intercontinental ballistic missile.
The first stage of the system is there to get it off the ground, get initial motion, but then it will drop that stage.
After the Hwasong 14's engines have sent it into space, all that is left is the re-entry vehicle. A warhead would be inside as gravity pulls it back to Earth.
You're at the mercy of the atmosphere at that point. You're slamming into it at many thousands of miles per hour. So that will have tremendous forces imparted on the re-entry vehicle.
And what kind of temperatures are we talking about there?
Many thousands of degrees.
North Korea cannot attack the U.S. with a nuclear weapon until it develops a re-entry vehicle that can stand that kind of heat.
This is the setup before the test.
Hugh Griffiths is head of the team which monitors the North Korean missile program for the UN Security Council. He says these pictures released by the regime last year were an attempt to prove it had already succeeded. A re-entry vehicle was subjected to a rocket engine blast.
Is that a realistic test?
We assessed that it wasn't sufficiently realistic to be credible.
Because the rocket engine does not create enough heat?
Correct. The heat produced by the rocket engine is not sufficient to mimic what this would experience re-entering the Earth's atmosphere.
North Korea released a picture of the scorched re-entry vehicle, and this one of its 33-year-old leader, Kim Jung Un, being shown how little had been burned away.
The idea of this narrative is to prove that yet another requirement of the nuclear and ballistic missile program has been achieved.
Kim Jung Un seems to be everywhere. Does it strike you as unusual that you would have a head of state inspecting a re-entry vehicle?
Yeah, the whole thing is inconceivable and out of like some bad science fiction film. The man is intimately connected with the whole program, and this is very deliberate and very unusual.
Almost all of North Korea's missiles, from long range down to short range, are carried on mobile launchers. This is a short-range Scud, developed by Russia in the 1950s and sold to countries all over the world. This one belongs to the Missile and Space Intelligence Center in Huntsville, Alabama.
This is a Russian Scud-B.
Senior intelligence analyst Steve Hancock says the Scud can be launched straight off the back of this truck.
But it's mobile. And even to this day, it's a very challenging aspect of the missile force for us to deal with.
A moving target is harder to hit.
Yes, sir. It's harder to find as well.
Hancock says a well-trained crew can raise, aim, and fire a Scud in 18 minutes.
Do they use these exact same procedures if they're launching a longer-range missile?
Yes, they're going to be very similar.
And is the launch time still about 18 minutes?
So the bigger the missile gets, it's probably going to get to be a little bit slower. But we don't know the exact launch times for all of the systems.
Inside the Missile and Space Intelligence Center, there's another Scud, laid out like a corpse on an autopsy table.
These are graphite rudders that sit in the exhaust of the missile and are used to steer the missile.
Marie, we agreed not to use her last name, is a missile engineer whose job is to know as much about the Scud as the people who built it.
This is the instrument section where the guidance equipment sits. So there's a lot of complex equipment in here.
Is that part made of what it looks like it's made of?
Plywood, yeah, it is.
Plywood.
It saves a lot of weight putting that wood in there instead of metal.
Plywood just doesn't sound like rocket science.
It doesn't feel that way to us as Westerners. They don't invest resources where it's not necessary.
It only has a range of 186 miles, but it would reach its target in about 5 minutes.
So then we get up to the real serious part of this missile, which is what we call the payload. The payload is everything including the warhead that sits inside this cavity. It can carry about 1,000 kilogram or 2,200 pound payload.
But here's the feature that sets this Scud apart.
This was designed to be a nuclear trainer, and you can tell because the thickness of the aeroshell here is more than what it would be for a standard high explosive warhead.
A nuclear trainer. This missile is capable of carrying a nuclear warhead.
This missile, as designed by Russia, was intended to carry a nuclear warhead.
A nuclear capable weapon with a 5-minute flight time? It doesn't give you much time to react.
It doesn't give you much, does it?
Last March, North Korea launched a salvo of 4 Scuds simultaneously in what it said was a drill to attack U.S. military bases.
Well, what's the purpose of firing a salvo of missiles?
Well, so a salvo is intended to overwhelm your defenses.
Senior weapons analyst Scott McDonald took us into the Computer Simulation Center.
So what goes on in this room?
To show how missiles like those would perform in flight.
So as the videos from North Korea end, when they go into the clouds, we're able to represent the entire flight of the missile by putting this into a digital representation. And this looks a lot like a cartoon or a video game, but this is really a lot different. There's a lot of hard science and math that goes behind this.
At this point, the only defense would be to shoot them down, which is why these computer simulations go into so much detail.
So this is reverse engineering.
Exactly.
That's what would happen as it was re-entering?
Correct. So it's showing a kind of a tumbling motion, and you can see the pressure waves coming off of that missile. That's the aerodynamic forces that are acting on that missile. And that's how we understand how it's going to fly.
The Scud can reach targets in South Korea, where 28,500 American troops are based. Another North Korean missile, called the Nodong, has a great enough range to hit Japan, where 54,000 American servicemen are stationed.
It's a scaled-up Scud missile.
Mark Clark is director of the Military and Space Intelligence Center.
Japan and South Korea and all the Americans living there are already in range of nuclear-capable missiles?
They're certainly in range of Scud and Nodong-class missiles, absolutely.
How many Scud and Nodong-class missiles do the North Koreans have?
Hundreds.
Hundreds?
Yes.
Clark would not discuss classified intelligence about North Korea, but he did tell us this.
We have insights today that we didn't have a few years ago.
Such as?
I'm hesitant to go into sources and methods, except to say that there are opportunities we've had to observe and learn about the ballistic missile threats there.
In February 2016, the U.S. and its allies got their hands on another missile, this time a long-range one, part of a rocket North Korea used to launch a satellite into orbit.
The satellite never really functioned. It wasn't a serious satellite, but it was a serious rocket.
The UN's Hugh Griffiths says the rocket was really a test vehicle for an intercontinental ballistic missile, and a large part of it fell into the sea.
The South Korean Navy got to this location, and when debris fell from the sky, they were able to recover some of that debris and invited us to inspect it.
So you physically got your hands on some of the components that had been used?
Yes, we were very lucky. We were able to photograph the debris, take it apart, and run checks on the serial numbers of quite a variety of components.
In the past 2 years, North Korea has conducted more than 40 test launches, virtually every one of them personally approved and supervised by Kim Jung Un.
But what he's shown is that he has a tolerance for failure.
Tom Boyd, senior intelligence analyst for ballistic missiles at the Air and Space Intelligence Center, means that as a compliment.
If you are not willing to fail in the ballistic missile or space launch vehicle missiles business, you're in the wrong business. It's almost inevitable. These are highly complex systems, and failures are pretty much inevitable.
So, 2016 saw a lot of failures.
I can't recall the exact number, but he did have significant failures.
And not so many this year.
He's having much better success this year.
So it just looks like they figured something out.
Yes, I think they have learned from their failures.
What North Korea figured out is a high-thrust engine, seen here in a ground test, and a high-performance fuel to power it.
Would you say that engine and that fuel is responsible for their recent successes?
They seem to be getting good performance, yes.
The Pentagon says it's confident its missile defense system, 42 interceptors based in Alaska and California, can shoot down a North Korean ICBM, although the test record shows only a 55% success rate. Last May, it shot down this mock North Korean missile, which was designed from models developed by the Air and Space Intelligence Center. Despite that most recent success, ICBMs are what Boyd calls a challenging target.
They've been referred to as the ultimate weapon. They get to the target very quickly. An ICBM has a reentry velocity on the order of 4 to 5 miles per second. So there's very little time to react.
So how long before North Korea can really threaten the American homeland with an ICBM?
Probably several more flight tests, but ultimately, if they want to have confidence that the system works as intended, they have to flight test it and prove that that reentry vehicle can survive realistic reentry conditions.
So that really is then the moment of truth. When they launch, if they launch, a ballistic missile out over the Pacific Ocean at a range approximating what it would take to reach the United States.
That would give them higher confidence that the system really works as they want it to.
At the rate North Korea is testing, U.S. intelligence estimates that could happen as early as next year.
In Thursday's press conference, President Trump would not say how the United States will respond to the actions of North Korea's dictator over the last week. Kim Jung Un tested a new type of missile. Then his estranged brother was poisoned in a Malaysian airport. South Korea's spy agency believes Kim ordered the hit. Kim has nuclear weapons and has promised to test an intercontinental ballistic missile. Such a weapon could eventually carry a nuclear warhead and threaten American cities. That possibility and the missiles he has aimed at South Korea are so dangerous, U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis went to Seoul on his first foreign trip. We went just days later and saw how tense the situation has become. We got two important perspectives. We spoke to the commander of the 28,000 American troops there, as well as the highest-ranking North Korean to defect in decades. He told us the missiles and murders are part of Kim's raging obsession with the survival of his regime.
I've been in Seoul for 6 months, and to be honest, I was never, public until now.
We went for an evening out in Seoul with Tae Young-ho. He was North Korea's deputy ambassador in London before he defected in August.
So first time on the subway.
Yes, that's right.
A defection by someone of his rank is extremely rare.
Where do we stand?
This was the first time he had walked about in public. Just off camera, 6 bodyguards watched his every move as we made our way down one of the busiest shopping streets in Asia. North Korea has assassinated defectors in Seoul.
In order to prevent more possible defections from North Korea, I think Kim Jung Un may do anything.
Even kill you.
Of course, why not?
The man who could order an assassination is Kim Jung Un. The dictator is the 3rd member of the Kim family to rule North Korea. They have controlled the impoverished country with an ironclad fist for 70 years. This was last week's missile test. Kim devotes a quarter of his country's economy to weapons like this and his million-man army, despite widespread food shortages.
Kim Jung Un strongly believes that once he possesses ICBM, then he can easily scare off America.
Right now, how dangerous is North Korea to the stability of South Korea and as a threat to the United States?
Kim Jong Un's capability to wreak harm, not only to America, but also South Korea and the world, should not be underestimated.
During his 5 years in power, Kim Jung Un has expanded North Korea's nuclear arsenal, despite international sanctions that have brought his country's economy to its knees. Electricity is scarce. From space, North Korea is a black hole. That's it, wedged between the shining lights of South Korea and China to the north. Tae said he was living a comfortable life here at the North Korean embassy in London before he fled with his wife and 2 grown sons.
The safety is guaranteed by the government.
His job in London was to spread North Korean propaganda and report back on his colleagues. You all live together under one roof?
Yes.
So you could keep an eye on each other?
Keep an eye on each other, control each other, and even spy on each other.
But Tae said he lost all faith in the regime when Kim Jung Un killed his own uncle in 2013 and executed dozens of perceived enemies, including diplomats. I've seen tape of you giving speeches.
Yes.
In London. You're very convincing. You seem to be a true believer yourself.
If I show any sign of hesitation, then I would be,
what would happen to you?
I would be sent to prison camps, so my whole family's life will be jeopardized.
Tae said there was one big obstacle to his defection.
All North Korean diplomats are forced to leave one of their children back in Pyongyang as a hostage. See?
As a hostage?
Yes. When my children grow up.
His break came when that policy unexpectedly changed, and Tae's oldest son was allowed to join the family in London. They all agreed to defect. He would not give us the details of his escape and who helped, but we know he was kept in a safe house by South Korean intelligence agents and questioned for more than 3 months. He said it was too dangerous for us to meet his family. Now, I've been talking to you for a couple of days now. You come from a secretive place.
Yes.
But I think you still have lots of secrets.
Sure, yes.
How do we know that what he is telling us is the truth and not just self-serving?
You know, when a defector makes a decision to jump ship, he is doing it at a huge cost. His co-workers, relatives, in-laws will be purged or killed.
Chung Min Lee was South Korea's ambassador for national security until last year. He said looks here can be deceiving. The risk of war today is exceptionally high. I think most Americans right now would see this as a holdover from the Cold War. But it seems to be quite hot when you're here.
This is the only place on the entire planet where you have nearly 1 million forces on both sides standing ready to fight a war in basically a nanosecond. And who is there right in the middle of this? It's basically the U.S. forces.
If there is war, this is where the big fight will take place.
Lee helped shape Seoul's policy toward North Korea. He went with us to Panmunjom, the village in the 2.5-mile wide demilitarized zone that separates North and South Korea. As we got closer, Seoul's sprawl gave way to military checkpoints. The agreement that suspended the Korean War was signed here, but there's still no peace treaty. The war began when the Communist North invaded in 1950. 34,000 Americans were killed in what amounted to a stalemate.
So this is the longest war on paper since World War II. So we are still technically in a state of war.
Today, both sides still stare each other down. That's North Korea right there, that building just 100 yards away. We were told to avoid sudden movements that could be interpreted as threatening. It wasn't long before North Korean soldiers took an interest in all the activity. So we went inside a negotiation hut that straddles the border.
What is right behind
Right behind the door is basically from there on, since this is North Korea, once you go out, that's it. We have no jurisdiction on that side of the door.
So if I were to walk out that door,
that's it.
I'm in the hands of North Korea.
That's true.
Let's stay on this side.
Let's stay on this side.
It was all surreal. This part of the DMZ closest to Seoul had the feel of a Cold War theme park, complete with a fake village on the North Korean side built to impress the South. And in case you missed the point, loudspeakers blared propaganda. Martial songs praising Kim Jung Un. A few miles away, tourists crowded an observation deck, snapping photos with troops, cardboard cutouts, and the real ones. What the visitors could not see on the other side of those mountains are 10,000 artillery pieces the North Korean military has aimed at Seoul, all of which could reach the 28 million people in and around the South Korean capital. U.S. war planners estimate 500,000 people could be killed in a second Korean War.
Is there any other metropolitan area on Earth this vulnerable?
Certainly nothing that approaches Seoul in terms of the size, the density of the population. There's nothing like it.
U.S. Air Force General James Slife flew with us over the city. It's just 30 miles from the DMZ. We landed at Osan Air Base, where Korean airmen and their American colleagues monitor all activity north of the DMZ. For security, they shut off the giant video displays right before we came in. This facility is among the first to detect North Korean missile launches.
You're like on a war footing all the time here.
That's right. This is truly one of those places where the best way to prevent a war is being ready for a war.
The North's latest missile test used a new type of solid fuel engine and was fired from a mobile launcher, making it quick to deploy and difficult for U.S. satellites to detect in real time.
With the development of ballistic missiles, with the development of nuclear weapons, things here have a tension that you can feel in the air as you move around places like this.
We wanted to talk to the general who leads U.S. forces in Korea and would command Korean troops in the event of a war. He asked to meet us at Guard Post 4. It's a citadel on critical high ground at the end of a road lined with landmines. We were the first American news crew allowed in.
Hands up.
This was no Cold War theme park. Body armor was required, and artillery was on standby in the event we came under fire.
Hello, General. How are you? Very nice to meet you.
General Vincent Brooks has commanded U.S. forces fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan.
I don't think people at home know how tense this line is.
What it takes to go from the condition we're in at this moment
to hostilities again is literally the matter of a decision on North Korea's side to say fire. And on top of this, we have the missile capability that's been developed, over 120 missiles fired just in the time of Kim Jung Un alone.
So now they're talking about ICBMs that might be able to reach the west coast of the United States. How do you stop them from taking that next step?
North Korea is responsible for the direction that the region is going. It is responsible for the conditions of instability that are starting to arise. It has to take responsibility for that and stop.
His country is poor, his people are starving. What is it that he wants?
Survival, recognition.
Survival.
Kim Jung Un is now recognized as a global threat. U.S. intelligence estimates he has at least 10 nuclear weapons. If the U.S. decided it had no choice but to launch a preemptive strike on an ICBM test site, it could trigger the unthinkable.
If North Korea uses nuclear weapons, it will be met with an effective and overwhelming response. Now, they can take it to the bank. And we make that same point to our allies and partners like the Republic of Korea, like Japan.
Effective and overwhelming response.
Effective and overwhelming response.
Wipe North Korea off the map.
Whatever overwhelms you.
That warning rang in our ears as we returned to Seoul and met one last time with defector Tae-Young-ho. We asked about his brother and sister still in North Korea.
What do you think has happened to them?
They will be sent to prison camps. That is what I'm absolutely sure.
Does that weigh on you?
Of course, yes. I cannot get rid of that kind of nightmare every night of seeing my brother and sister in prison camps.
Tae told us he believes he can help topple the North Korean regime by encouraging other defections and speaking out. During the campaign, President Trump called Kim Jung Un a maniac. His language has been much more careful since the latest missile test.
One of the key questions of this presidential campaign is who has the health and temperament to become the next commander-in-chief and assume the unthinkable power to use nuclear weapons. The Cold War as we knew it may be over, but both the U.S. and Russia still keep enough nuclear weapons on alert to end civilization. And now a new Cold War is brewing, with both sides developing more sophisticated and more accurate weapons. Tonight, we're going to show you what this new Cold War looks like from inside the U.S. Strategic Command. STRATCOM, as it's called, trains every day for the possibility of nuclear war and takes extraordinary measures to make sure one person and one person only, the President of the United States, can give the order to launch a nuclear weapon.
130, 120, 110, 100 feet, 84.
The USS Kentucky rising to the surface off the coast of Hawaii. Nearly 2 football fields long, it is the deadliest engine of destruction in the American arsenal. Able to carry almost 200 nuclear warheads atop the missiles loaded beneath those hatches. Commander Brian Freck is the captain.
The warheads that can be carried on my missiles are extremely powerful.
And compare them to the bomb that leveled Hiroshima.
Much more powerful than that. Much more powerful than Hiroshima.
Up to 30 times more powerful. And on any given day, a number of these submarines are hiding somewhere in the world's oceans, ready to respond to a launch order from the president.
When you're out here, are other countries looking for you?
I always operate on that assumption that someone is looking for me.
Has anybody ever found you?
No, not even close.
You sure?
Yes, I am.
60 Minutes found the Kentucky, but only because we had arranged a rendezvous to go aboard.
If this boat were a country, you'd be a nuclear power.
That's true, yes, sir.
Does that ever give you pause to have all that power under your command?
It's a lot of responsibility, but with that responsibility comes a lot of training and practice.
Die! Die!
shut. All vents cycled, all vents shut.
Operating at a depth of 160 feet, the Kentucky's crew practiced the procedures needed to launch its missiles.
Set condition 1SQ for training. This is the captain. This is an exercise.
Set condition 1SQ for training. Con weapons act.
Spin up all missiles. Chief Lawat, sound the general alarm.
Sound the general alarm, right, sir. I have permission to fire. Con weapons act.
Before that trigger can be squeezed, multiple keys, including one that unlocks the missile tubes, which take up approximately 1/3 of the ship, have to be brought out from different safes.
No one person can make a launch happen. So I have keys in my possession. Other members of the crew have keys in their possession.
One key is carried to the captain by 2 sailors, who both must hold it.
Captain, the launch is authorized.
And here's the thing you need to know about the safe where that key is kept.
No one on board has the combination. We get that combination with the launch order. That is my way of knowing that the president has ordered the launch, is when the combination he gives me opens that safe.
The president literally gives you the combination to the safe that the key is in.
Yes. You have permission to fire.
2 weapons, you have permission to fire, right, sir? Weapons, Con, you have permission to fire.
The Kentucky and other nuclear missile submarines, along with intercontinental ballistic missiles and nuclear bombers,
Attention on deck.
are under the command of Admiral Cecil Haney,
Your nuclear forces are capable of executing all assigned missions.
head of the U.S. Strategic Command. Haney is the most powerful military officer you've never heard of, in command not just of the nation's nuclear forces, but its space satellites and cyber weapons as well.
There are no significant solar activity causing impacts to satellite operations or communications.
His morning briefing at Strategic Command headquarters in Omaha, Nebraska is classified above top secret.
Thank you. Appreciate the update.
That clock-marked POTUS, short for President of the United States, tells Haney what time zone President Obama is in case he has to reach the commander-in-chief in a hurry.
So who in the United States government has the authority to order the use of nuclear weapons?
Only the President of the United States has that authority.
Does Congress have to approve?
No, Congress does not have to approve.
So these really are the President's own weapons?
It's our nation's weapons with the President's authority, yes.
Attention on deck.
Haney took us to his Global Operations Center, a top-secret facility 3 stories underground. If a missile were launched against the United States, the warning would be received here, and that clock would start ticking down. Colonel Barbara Buells was the watch commander.
I see this sign up here, red impact,
Yes,
blue
sir.
impact time. So red impact would be an enemy missile,
That is correct.
and you would have a time.
We would have a time to impact. And blue impact would be any U.S. counterattack.
Lieutenant Colonel Christopher Geelan would pull out the options for a retaliatory nuclear strike.
My responsibility as the STRATCOM Nuclear Strike Advisor is to be the expert on Nuclear Decision Handbook and the alert status of all U.S. nuclear forces.
The Nuclear Decision Handbook.
Yeah, also known as the Black Book.
Black Book. So is there a copy of the Black Book down here?
There is. It's in the safe down here, sir.
An identical copy of the Black Book is in that briefcase which follows the president wherever he goes.
So he's never away from the options.
That's correct.
And would they tell him what kinds of weapons you would use, what targets you would hit?
They would be that specific, yes.
Would they give him an estimate of casualties?
Yeah, we would have to give the president answers to a lot of different questions. That's one that I would expect to get.
Admiral Haney would go to a room called the battle deck where he would talk directly to the president.
And is this the phone you would use?
This is one of the phones I might use, yes.
Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Secretary of Defense. I don't see the man who
You're
controls...
looking for the president.
I am.
I can speak to the president directly from this microphone.
And in a crisis, how long does it take to get the president on the line?
Not very long.
If Russia launched a missile from a submarine off the coast of the United States, it would take only minutes to reach its target.
So how long, in fact, does the president have to make a decision?
He has minutes, 7, 8, 9 minutes, depending on details, but less than 10 minutes.
Former Secretary of Defense William Perry was a key architect of nuclear weapons during the Cold War with the Soviet Union.
If the weapons can be launched within minutes, does that mean we're still in the same old hair trigger
yes.
standoff that we were during the Cold War?
That's right. And we still have launch on warning, the same policy we had then. We still have the same hair trigger response.
So what's changed since the Cold War if we're still on this hair trigger alert?
Fundamentally, nothing has changed.
But the numbers of weapons are much lower now than during the Cold War.
The number of weapons are sufficient to destroy, obliterate all of civilization.
Still?
Still. It doesn't take that many. We still have more than 1,000 nuclear weapons on alert, ready to go. It doesn't take 1,000 to destroy civilization.
At the end of the Cold War, both sides pledged to point their missiles at the open ocean. But it would take just minutes to change back to real targets. That provides a small hedge against an accidental war triggered by a false alarm of the kind Perry experienced in 1979 when a watch officer mistakenly inserted a training tape into a computer.
So it looked like 200 ICBMs were on the way from the Soviet Union to the United States. Happily, we got that situation figured out before we had to go to the president. But had we not, he would have received a call at 3 o'clock in the morning and said, "Sir, you have 7 or 8 minutes to decide whether to launch this before these missiles land on our ICBM silos."
And what was the fail-safe there? What stopped it from going to the president?
What stopped it was an astute general who sensed something was wrong.
If you've had one serious case in 45 years, that would seem like a pretty good record.
Yeah, it only takes one. It only takes one.
Strategic Command is building a new $1.2 billion headquarters, but it won't be any more able to survive a nuclear blast than the underground command center in the current headquarters. That clock counting down the time to missile impact would also tell Admiral Haney how long he had to get out of there alive.
Safe escape time that you see indicated is the time left remaining for Admiral Haney, as the commander of US STRATCOM, to exit the battle deck, to be able to make it to his commander support aircraft, to be able to board that aircraft and continue to provide his advice to the President of the United States as his senior nuclear advisor.
On the tarmac at STRATCOM, air crews drill to take off from this airborne command post fast enough to escape incoming nuclear weapons. If Admiral Haney's headquarters were destroyed and he didn't make it out in time,
the President is talking to his...
It would be up to Rear Admiral Andy Lennon to assume command and make sure the President and only the President could still give the order to launch nuclear weapons.
We're in voice communications with the President.
Talking to the President personally?
Yes, sir. So that way we are ensuring that we're getting the President's intent.
How do you know it's the President?
We have some very complex and secure procedures to authenticate the President and to be sure that we're really talking to the President of the United States.
So he can't just tell you, this is the President speaking?
He can, but we will authenticate to verify that it is the President speaking.
Once the President has given you that order, what do?
Then we would communicate that order to our strategic forces, our intercontinental ballistic missiles, our bombers, or our submarines.
Chief of Watch, sound the general alarm.
Sound the general alarm, aye, sir.
The order would be received on board the Kentucky and the crew would go through launch procedures they have practiced hundreds of times before. Last year, the Kentucky actually fired an unarmed missile in a test flight which lit up the California sky and caused a brief UFO scare. Had it carried a real warhead.
This is our meteorological effects officer.
Stuart Miller, a young Air Force captain aboard the Airborne Command Post, would begin charting the unthinkable.
My main role is gathering information on nuclear detonations worldwide and then applying meteorological data to them, specifically winds, to figure out if there's fallout, depending on the attributes of the detonation, where the fallout's going, how many people might be affected, who might be affected, things of that nature.
So you basically come up with a casualty estimate of?
Essentially, yes. That's one of the things that I can provide.
You must have looked at some pretty depressing scenarios.
We kind of do, yeah. Yes.
Have you ever had the conversation with yourself, well, what if the President issued an order to use nuclear weapons and I didn't agree with it? Would I carry out that order?
The President expects me as his combatant commander to provide him the best military advice I have. So he would expect me to voice my opinion.
You would have a voice, but if you disagreed with the decision.
I'm a military man, and we follow the orders of our commander-in-chief.
NATO, which just marked its 70th anniversary, is widely considered the gold standard of military alliances, binding countries on both sides of the Atlantic in common cause against Russian aggression. But President Trump complains that other members of the alliance don't pay their fair share of what it costs to defend Europe against the intimidation tactics of Vladimir Putin. The president has told aides he doesn't see the point of the alliance and has even mentioned withdrawing from NATO. Despite those misgivings, the U.S. and its NATO allies have been steadily increasing the frequency and size of their military exercises. Last fall, NATO held the largest one yet in Norway, one of the countries President Trump has singled out for failing to spend enough on defense. You might not think of Norway, which has a tiny military, as a vital NATO ally. But we found a country that is on the front lines with Russia and serves as NATO's eyes and ears in the high north. Norway's F-16s are on 15-minute alert 24/7. Every time Russian military aircraft are detected, these pilots scramble to intercept them. Videos they bring back show nuclear-capable Russian bombers as they fly up and down the Norwegian coast. Most of the encounters are routine. But sometimes, says Lieutenant General Rune Jakobsen, Norway's Joint Force commander, they're anything but.
What we have seen lately is aggressive flying and simulated attacks against Norwegian exercises.
Simulated attacks?
Yeah.
How do you know it's a simulated attack?
An airman knows what an attack looks like.
So they go to the point at which they would release their weapons?
Exactly.
Jakobsen tracked those simulated attacks from his command center buried deep inside a mountain. After the Cold War ended, a nuclear-proof bunker seemed positively old-fashioned, until lately when Russia became more threatening.
This is an illustration of a Russian attack formation, simulated attack, that was flown in May 2017, not far north of this position.
And the red dot is the target?
The red dot is the target.
That doesn't look like the act of a friendly country.
No, that's not something you should do to your neighbor.
Norway shares a 120-mile border with its neighbor Russia. It is some of the most remote, rugged, and beautiful landscape in all of Europe. Captain Karina Winterdal guards the northern sector with 120 soldiers.
They are along the border all the time, 24/7. I have people along the border. So I have 4 observation posts that are manned at all time throughout the whole year.
Are your soldiers armed?
Yeah.
Do they ever have to use their weapons?
No, but we have to be prepared.
We went to the most remote of those outposts in the high north of the Norwegian mainland. One unit was just finishing its 3 weeks on watch and a new one coming in. To get there, you have to lug your gear up a long, steep staircase, part of which is covered over to defend against the Arctic winter. The observation post is manned year-round, and once you get to the top, you can see why it's worth the trouble. These Norwegian soldiers are able to look deep into Russia and far out to sea, making this a key piece of terrain for the NATO alliance.
That's Russia over there, and this is where the border with Norway ends. It's NATO's northernmost flank, and you don't need to be a military expert to know you can never leave your flank exposed. That includes the Barents Sea out there. Those are the home operating waters of Russia's northern fleet and are kept under constant surveillance by the U.S. and Norway.
This map shows what lies just over the horizon on that thumb of land called the Kola Peninsula. It is the home of Russia's northern fleet. naval bases, airfields, and nuclear weapons storage sites, which represent that country's single greatest concentration of military power, especially submarines.
They have a very capable submarine force, and we've seen an increase in submarine activity over the last few years that causes me pause.
Admiral James Fogo, the commander of U.S. naval forces in Europe, is particularly concerned about this submarine, the Severodvinsk, nuclear-powered and armed with land attack cruise missiles with a range greater than 1,000 miles.
The Severodvinsk is a brand new class of submarine, and it's very capable, it's very quiet. So that's the most important thing, I think, in submarine warfare.
When you say quiet, you're saying harder to detect, harder to track.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Does that sub come down into the Atlantic?
Suffice it to say that the Russians have increased their presence in all bodies of water around Europe and in the Atlantic.
Have you ever lost the Severodvinsk?
I'd rather not comment on submarine operations to that specific level of detail.
Fogo won't comment, but Pentagon officials told 60 Minutes that last summer the Severodvinsk slipped into the Atlantic Ocean and for weeks evaded all attempts to find it. In peacetime, losing a Russian sub in the Atlantic is embarrassing. In a crisis, it could be a disaster.
Think about the global infrastructure that rests on the bottom of the ocean.
You're talking about the undersea cables.
That's correct.
Those fiber optic cables carry 99.4% of the data exchanged over the Internet by the U.S. and its allies and trading partners. Depending on your point of view, they are either the backbone or the Achilles heel of the world economy.
Have Russian submarines gotten close to those undersea cables?
I'm not at liberty to talk about any of that.
That's because tracking Russian submarines is a top-secret, day-in, day-out game of hide and seek. But the Norwegian military allowed 60 Minutes aboard one of its maritime patrol planes to see what sub-hunting looks like. The pilot, co-pilot, and engineer are up front, while the crew in the back scans the Norwegian Sea with radar and high-powered cameras. Flying at less than 300 feet, they can clearly make out anything on the surface, including passing cargo ships. For what's under the water, they drop patterns of sonobuoys which send out sound waves that will bounce off a submerged submarine. Major Leif Outerholm, the plane's tactical coordinator, has been flying these missions since the 1980s.
And it is very important to collect on remote locations.
How big an area is it that you have to cover?
The area operation for this kind of aircraft is 6 times larger than the area of land in Norway, so it's quite big.
So how frequently do you encounter the Russians out here?
We encounter them regularly when we go further east.
Further east lies the headquarters of the Northern Fleet, and Norwegian patrol planes frequently spot Russian submarines while they're still on the surface. But the most valuable intelligence is collected by a ship, one you've never heard of. There it is, down there in the harbor, the crown jewel of Norway's fleet.
That's Norway's newest spy ship, the Marjata. It's at sea nearly 300 days a year monitoring the Northern Fleet, but just happened to be in port the day we arrived here in Kirkenes, the town closest to the Russian border. The Marjata flies the Norwegian flag, but much of its eavesdropping equipment comes from the U.S.
Its mission is to collect intelligence on the operations of Russia's Northern Fleet, which Lieutenant General Jakobsen says is arming itself with a new generation of precision-guided weapons and testing them in the waters off Norway.
Are you able to monitor those?
Yeah, because most of the testing of new equipment is done up north of the Kola Peninsula, and we are present there every day with our maritime patrol aircrafts and our vessels at sea.
That daily haul of intelligence, all of which is directly relayed to the U.S. and NATO, didn't stop President Trump from sending this letter of complaint. Norway, he wrote, is the only NATO ally sharing a border with Russia that lacks a credible plan to spend 2% of its gross domestic product on defense.
Well, I think that
He has a fair point in pointing out that we need to step up.
Ina Eriksen Søreide is Norway's foreign minister, the first woman to hold the job.
So these are all your predecessors?
They are. And they're all men.
And they're all men. You're the first woman.
Yeah.
Before that, she was defense minister. In 2014, when all the members of NATO pledged to increase their military spending to 2% of their GDP.
So have you met that pledge?
No, we haven't met it yet, but we are moving in the right direction, and we are doing a lot of big investments.
The biggest of those investments is the American-made F-35, a stealth fighter designed to evade state-of-the-art air defenses.
It will dramatically increase operational capabilities, both in the high north and beyond.
Norway is buying 52 of them at a cost of $89 million each.
It's a very expensive airplane.
Well, and it also functions well, and it has capabilities that we need. Our F-16 has served us well, but they are starting to get old.
Those F-16s are going on 40 years old and were never designed to be stealthy. Until they are replaced by the F-35, Lieutenant General Jacobsen told us, Norway's Air Force will be no match for Russia's modern air defenses.
Meaning, today, if we had a conflict, we would not be able to fly in the northernmost part of Norway.
So your Air Force today couldn't operate in the very high north?
No, not in a serious crisis.
Last fall, NATO practiced what it would do in a serious crisis, bringing in 50,000 troops, 250 aircraft, and 65 ships, all under the command of Admiral Foggo.
This is one of the largest NATO exercises since the Cold War.
Called Trident Juncture, it was a war game designed to repulse an invasion of Norway by an unnamed country, whose identity was a mystery to no one.
And the message to Russia is?
The message to Russia or anybody else that may want to challenge the alliance is think twice. You don't want to mess with us.
It was the first time in nearly 30 years the U.S. had sent a carrier strike group, the USS Harry S. Truman and its escorts, above the Arctic Circle, a long way from the Persian Gulf and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Did you feel that NATO just wasn't paying attention to Norway?
What we saw was that NATO over many years had been engaged heavily, for instance, in Afghanistan, and that's a very important mission. But we also saw that some of the, I would say, core areas of NATO, the territorial defense, maybe had not had the same attention over years.
Well, now you have an American aircraft carrier operating off your coast.
I think it is a very good way of showing that we have to practice in peacetime to be able to operate if the crisis occurs.
Norway will never have a military that can take on its much larger and more powerful neighbor. But the pilots who fly these F-16s call themselves the Guardians of the North. They can't stop the Russians, but they are the first to spot them.